Do you have a Rikon 14-inch bandsaw, the model 10-324, or the Rikon Deluxe 14-inch bandsaw, model 10-325, like mine? You may be getting a little tired of hunting up the Allen wrenches every time you need to adjust the blade guides. Well, not to worry, because Rikon has come up with a new toolless blade guide retrofit kit for our saws. And I'm going to install this on mine right now, so let's take a look. Before we get started upgrading the blade guides on my saw, in the interest of full disclosure and full transparency, I want to tell you that for a number of years, this has been and remains one of my top favorite machines in my shop. I've had a lot of 14-inch class bandsaws in the past, and this is, bar none, the best. It runs so smooth, and ever since I discovered the Highland Woodworking wood slicer blade, I've used nothing else, and I've been nothing but happy with this saw. Now, having said that, I have been intrigued and frankly somewhat lustful for the model 10-353, which is a 14-inch saw, but it's the one Rikon terms professional. It runs on 220 volts. It has a foot brake for the blade, which would be very nice, and it has its own built-in mobility kit. I have this saw mounted on a third-party wheeled base, and it's a little gimpy. And speaking of third-party add-ons, not long after I got the saw, I installed third-party blade guides. They were reputed to be better and also supposed to be toolless in design. Well, I've had some issues with these, so I'm really anxious to put on the Rikon. Let's get going. When you open up your new toolless blade guide retrofit kit, which by the way is packaged very well, you're going to find an upper blade guide assembly, completely assembled, a lower blade guide assembly, and new upper blade guard to replace the guard on your saw, a blade guard scale, and a few fasteners. In addition, you're going to find a little instruction book. Looks pretty straightforward, so let's get going. The first step in changing this out is to remove your bandsaw blade. Now, I found I didn't need to remove it all the way. I just needed to get it out of the way. It would probably be safer to go ahead and remove it all the way. Then there is one nut, cap nut, back here on the back that you need to loosen, and your upper blade guide will drop right out of the way. The next step is to lower the blade guard down all the way. You have to move your fence out of the way. And remove two cap head screws that hold the blade guard in place. You'll need to save these screws. They'll be used to mount the new blade guard. Now, once that's done, you can now go about raising this up and installing your new blade guides. Put the new upper blade guide, simply slide it in until it's seated, and tighten up the same nut that you loosened before to remove the other one. Then the next step is to lower this back down, and we'll install the new blade guide. And that's going to go on just like the old one. Now before you tighten this up fully, you want to make sure that you've got it parallel and in the right position. And we may need to, I'm just guessing, but we may need to tweak this a bit after the blade is reinstalled. Now it's on to the lower blade guide. The lower blade guide assembly has a mounting hole that matches a hole on the bottom of your saw. But the blade guide assembly also has a locator pin. And in some supplemental instructions with the kit, it tells you that if there is not a hole on your saw for that locator pin, you have two choices. You can either saw off the pin flush, or you can elongate the mounting hole to accommodate this pin. Now I'm going to saw this pin off because elongating the hole in the frame of my saw looks like a really big job. This doesn't look nearly as bad cutting off this pin. So I'm going to go get a vise and a hacksaw and take care of that, and I'll be right back. The lower blade guide assembly attaches with this bracket and one socket screw right up through here, and then you have an adjustment for the rear thrust bearing and an adjustment that moves this back and forth. So that pretty much completes the installation. Well, that turned out to actually be pretty easy. If it wasn't for setting up cameras and lights and shooting video, I probably would have made this conversion in 15 or 20 minutes, I'm guessing. Pretty straightforward, real easy to do. A couple of things that I learned along the way: the blade guard has elongated holes over here where it mounts, and you will need to adjust that in and out until you get it more or less centered here on your upper wheel to make sure it doesn't come in contact with it when you raise and lower the guard. The other thing that I noticed about this was on the lower assembly, there are two plastic pieces that are on either side of the blade. There is a little bit of adjustment room in that, and I had to adjust mine because the blade was rubbing on it on the left-hand side just a smidge. Easy way to get to that is to remove your throat plate, and you can stick a hex wrench right down in there, loosen that, move it to where it needs to be, and retighten it. So that was pretty straightforward. As far as mounting the lower assembly, a little bit more difficult because of the tightness of the space, but once I got the screw started, then it was really easy. The adjustments are fantastic. Now on my previous so-called toolless system, the thumb screws were maybe 1/4 of an inch wide. They were really tiny. And getting a hold of them to tighten or loosen was very difficult, so most of the time I wound up with a small pair of pliers loosening and tightening those, which kind of defeats the idea of it being toolless. These are great big, easy to grab, easy to loosen, easy to tighten. The bearings are also at least twice the size of the bearings on that third-party setup that I had purchased, and I really like the way the bearings turn. Real nice. Adjusting this, simply loosen it, and of course this is spring-loaded. So it pops out to its farthest position, and that's nice because all you've got to do is push it up to right where you want it and tighten it, and it stays where you tighten it. On the previous system I had, there was an adjustment knob, but it had a ton of slop play in the threads. You would actually have to turn it like a half a turn to engage the threads and get it to start moving, and if you overshot a little bit, then you were going back a full half a turn to get the threads to engage again and get it to move, and it was real fiddly trying to get it set just right. These are super easy. So I don't know about the yellow, but I kind of understand why they did it. It's going to take me a little time to get used to that. But anyway, it's on, it's adjusted. Now I'm going to make a cut and see how it works. Arguably, the toughest test for any bandsaw is resawing. Now, in fairness, I have a wood slicer blade on here, and that turns any bandsaw into a champion. But still, I'm anxious to see how these new bearings work out, so let's make a cut. All right, so what was I looking for in that cut? Well, what I was trying to do was to push the board up flush to the fence, use no guide on the top of the board, no pencil mark, and just push it along flush with the fence and see how my cut tracked. Unfortunately, it turns out this board, this is rough on this side, and it actually needs to be milled because there's a little bit of rocking on the fence. And as a result, I got a little bit of a thin cut right in the beginning. But then after that, the board flattened out, and from here over, I got a perfectly uniform thickness and a pretty doggone smooth cut with nothing but guiding it along the fence. So in my book, that's pretty doggone good. So if you have an older model Rikon and you'd like to give it a pretty serious upgrade, consider the toolless blade guide kit. It's worth the money. In fact, turns out this is actually less expensive than the third-party alternative that you can buy. So definitely a good deal. Call Highland and order one, or if you're shopping for a bandsaw now, consider the 10-326, which comes standard with these new toolless blade guides. And I just imagine that machine's wonderful. Well, thanks for watching. Look forward to seeing you in the next video.